Hoy tenemos la presencia del señor Zhao, quien nos va a ofrecer un curso sobre rehabilitación de puentes. Un curso que es bastante útil o requerido en este país, ya que existen muchos puentes existentes que requieren una rehabilitación y que esperamos que con cursos como estos podamos lograr resolver muchos de esos problemas. Tenemos registrados a 30 personas que dijeron que van a participar el día de hoy, unos todavía no han llegado, esperamos contar con más gente. Nada más para presentarles un poco, explicarles un poco, Jim, el doctor Jim, es un Senior Program Manager de la Autoridad de Tránsito del Área Metropolitana de Washington D.C., y él ha estado a cargo de lo que es el desarrollo de un programa de inspección de puentes, un manual de mantenimiento de puentes y lo que es la gestión de los puentes en general. Entonces, Jim cuenta con bastante experiencia en esta área. Él, con su formación académica, tiene un doctorado en manejo de proyectos de la Universidad de Bryson en los Estados Unidos. Está graduado, tiene un diploma en Project Management, Administración de Proyectos de la Universidad de Quebec en Canadá. Tiene una maestría de la Universidad de Ottawa en Ingeniería Civil y es bachiller de la Universidad de Shanghái, Tongji University en Shanghái. Sin más que agregar, le damos la bienvenida al doctor Jim y esperamos que sea del agrado de todos ustedes. Quería comentarles que este curso es un curso, el programa el curso que va a dar el día de hoy, él lo ofrece como parte de la American Society of Civil Engineers, que esa asociación ofrece cursos de capacitación para todos los agremiados en los Estados Unidos, y uno de estos cursos es este. Entonces, para eso, bueno, se me olvidó decir que el ingeniero Esteban Villalobos fue el que contactó a Jim, que es el coordinador de la unidad de puentes. Esteban lo contactó y logramos convencerlo para que viniera acá y nos pudiera presentar un poco sobre este tema tan interesante. Entonces, agradezco también a Esteban por su colaboración con el programa y esperamos nuevamente, bueno, reitero que ojalá sea del agrado de todos ustedes. Jim, welcome to Costa Rica.
Thank you. Again, my name is Zhao. I'm from United States, and I've been giving bridge rehabilitation seminar since 2000. And the reason I started giving that seminar was I had a lot of rehab projects. At that time, it was not a very large percentage of total project, probably like 30%. But I anticipate that because, especially in the United States, there's big deficit of bridge rehab and repairs. And actually, that deficit is accumulating since then. So now, most engineering companies have about 50% bridge rehab project and 50% design projects. I think the trend will continue unless the United States government really push for a big, like $1 trillion project as Trump has promised, but every president had such promise and we never see actually had any actions. But anyway, no matter what, bridge rehabilitation will be a major portion of bridge engineering profession, and it will be there for a long time. And so if you don't know bridge rehabilitation, I know everybody study bridge design, but if you don't know that portion, probably you are not, you will not be able to fulfill like the full capacity of your design as a bridge engineer. I don't know the condition of Costa Rica here. It's a beautiful city. It's my first time here, and I like it. and also it's a beautiful university too. And I'm sure that just like any aging infrastructure, it needs repairs. If the governments don't pay sufficient attention to maintain the existing structure, just keep on adding more and more new structures, and we will get into the same situation. So that's why I try to convince government. Actually, a very small fraction of the seminar will be discussing asset management. Basically, just give some kind of idea how we should allocate limited resources to different type of projects. But today, my main focus is on technical part. That's why I call technical seminar. Although I always spend some time on the management side as well. I hope there are a lot of people from government side or bridge owner side here. Basically, it will be content. This seminar will be divided into 8 sections, and there will be 5 case studies. Before I come here, I had some conversation with the university professors here, and they tell me that seismic and scar will be a major concern in this region. So I revised my regular seminar to put some concentration on these 2 elements. And each of the sections we will have a question and answer session, so that just feel free. It's not like a regular classroom, so you are not regular students. You will be free to ask any questions. And just if you feel something really urgent you want to ask and afraid of that you may forget, if you don't ask, you just raise your hand anytime. You will be able to give opportunity to ask. And I like the questions because if a question is really interested, I think that other people will learn a lot from the discussions of these questions. Basically, a bridge is just like a patient. When we see a doctor, and the doctor will come and say, "Hey Jim, how are you doing?" And it looks like the doctor is really, really a very good friend of mine. But in reality, he does not even know me very well. But what happened was, before he comes to see me, he looked at my record. So he basically just briefly looks through, so he knows what's going on and what potential question I may have. The bridge is the same. In the United States or in most other countries, the owner will keep a record of each bridge. So that's like in the past, it's like a paper record, but in the future it will be more like a digital record. We'll be discussing that later. And we also will be talking about bridge inspections and asset management in general. For bridge management, we usually call bridge management system, which is just asset management for bridge infrastructures. So for bridge record, if a bridge is in perfect, if the record is perfect, the record should have all these elements. And of course, many older bridges may not have such elements, like documents. But most important is actually the drawings and maintenance history and the inspection records will be discussed that individually. So plan, and I assume like in Costa Rica, it's very, very similar to United States or Canada, because in common law countries, the system is very, very similar. I think in Spanish country, they don't use common law system. They use French legal system, right? Am I right? Yeah. But anyway, it should have very, very similar documents. Basically, the the designer will develop a design drawing, we call contract drawings, and they put specifications and to bid that traditionally, and then the contractor bid based on the bid document, and then the contractor will develop a shop drawing, which will be the more detailed drawing and submit for approval, and once it's approved, then we'll fabricate and build. Of course, now we have more and more like a P3 type of project, public-private partnership, that will combine all these activities into a single package. We'll be discussing that later. But if you have perfect you should have a contract drawings and approved shop drawings and as-built. As-built is that after the contractor complete the construction, then they will just mark up any changes during the construction, and that will be the actual situation of the bridge, we call as-built. So if you are lucky enough, you have all these documents, and when you do a rehabilitation, usually this is more accurate information. That's typically true for older bridges, because when I look at the bridge design in 1950s, 1960s, that design drawing is very, very when we design buildings. When we design buildings, we engineers typically only specify member sizes and dimensions. They don't really give you how many rebars, bar schedules, and how many anchor bolts and location of bolts, that kind of thing. So the design is very, very conceptual, and they heavily rely on the contractor to develop as-built drawings. But now, I think the trend is that the design drawing is very much almost like the shop drawings. In other words, the designer will actually develop into such detail that even how many rebars, how the bar is bent, and that kind of thing is part of a contract. So if that's the case, these will very much merge into a similar document. And these will be very similar unless there's a changes during the construction. Typically, the contractor always have opportunities to revise designs if he can demonstrate that does not compromise the quality and the long-term serviceability of the structure, and it can save money. Typically in the United States, if a contractor can propose something, then the contractor will share the saving with only half-half. For example, if you design a steel bridge, and contractor look at that and say, I can propose a post-tension bridge, and I can save you such, and then probably the owner say, yeah, why not? Then they just share the cost savings. So specification is the same. Typically, each organization will have a standard specifications. The standard specification is typically a big package, and that will deal with most of the material, like concrete, reinforcing, steel, rebar, post tension, that kind of thing. But then there will be a special provision. Special provision typically is used to basically just, can I ask a question? How many of you actually have been design bridges? So I just get a sense, so I don't know how more detail I need to go into. So only very, very few people, actually most people are students, or how many students are here? Okay, so the rest will be bridge owners, I see, the managers. Okay. Okay, in that case, probably I would need to have a little bit a discussion of these kind of general ideas, so that when we talk about a document, how we collect document data, and how this data will be used to manage the bridge infrastructure, so you will have at least a common understanding. So again, special provision is the ones which is not covered. For example, because standard specification, typically they revise every about 5 years. So then there will be a new material, for example, fiber reinforced polymer, which is widely used for bridge rehabilitation project. Many standard specifications may not have. So the designer actually need to write these specifications, so we call it a special provision. That's for new ones. And sometimes there's a revision. For example, you may have concrete. The concrete may have, actually I use the American unit, like a 5K site as a standard concrete. And then people think that maybe 5K site is not good enough. We use 6K site now. So that you may have a special provision, basically just standard insert, so that from now on, every new project we just change that 5 to 6. So that kind of thing. In other words, it will be just a standard update of the standard specifications. Oh, sorry. Yes. And standard drawing, and it will be just like most organizations will have a standard drawings. The reason to have a standard drawing is that most of bridge owners don't want to have too many different details. It will be a nightmare for future maintenance. Just like if you're an airline company, you don't want to buy like 20 different airplanes. You want to concentrate on 3 or 4 models so that you can order parts and do maintenance a lot easier. The bridge design same. That's why most organizations will develop their standard drawings, how the abutment should be designed, what kind of bearing should use, because each organization have their experience at certain locations, and like whether they use a lot of salt, whether it's coastal environment, of a lot of like salty air in the moisture and that kind of thing. And so that once you have standard details, and the designer will be a lot easier, so they can just copy of these standard details. So these will be typically put into, you can sometimes, some organizations insert into a design package, like you have a design and you have a standard drawing, basically just the last 20 pages or standard drawing just insert into one package. Some organizations say that's a waste of resource, paper. They may just refer, just put in a note for example, for bridge railing, see standard number 35, so that the contractor, when they bid, they know what number 35 is. And these documents, typically we don't see a lot, but for newer bridges we may have. In other words, all the correspondence during construction should be kept, so that in the future, if there's a discrepancy, for example, if the original design drawing shows that detail, but when I go to a bridge inspection, the detail is different, which maybe the contractor may propose some changes, or sometimes the designer may ask contractors to make changes during the construction when they see some problems. And the photos, now with digital photos like is not an issue. Like imagine 15, 20 years ago, probably a lot of people are too young to remember that. You actually have to take a picture, and there's a film, typically it's 24, and if you only take like 6 pictures, you don't want to develop it because you waste a lot of, so you want to wait until all these 24 were taken, and then you actually have to go to outside to develop pictures, and then you have to cut and glue into your document. So that's why in the past we don't have a lot of photos. Typically you may have 2 or 3, but now with digital you can have as many as you wish. And the material and testing data. Material testing data is very essential for certain elements, like for example concrete. When we design, for example, we say 5K site, we really don't know what the strength is. So that's why contractor needs to do a material test. But that is not very essential. In the future, in a rehabilitation, for example, you may use that. If you look at design drawing, it says 5 actually. If you look at testing results, it says 5, average is 5.5. Then you may be able to say, maybe I can use 5.5 so that I don't need to reinforce it. It will be still sufficient even if I add new loading. But that's usually is very minimal. The key elements we use a lot is the piling, the foundation. We know like for superstructure, typically it's very, very mathematically determined. In other words, people can calculate, and the errors will not be very great. Maybe the worst scenario, like shear, for example, shear capacity, we don't have very, very good mathematical models. So probably when you do the calculation, when you actually do the testing, the error may be in the range of 20%. If for a bending, that kind of thing, it's typically 5% for steel, less than 5% steel. For concrete, probably like 10%. But for foundation, it's actually nobody knows. So that's why the design data is not really accurate to present actual capacity. That's why for most bridge constructions, we always have load testing for piers. And this data is very essential. Like for example, when you start do a widening, for example, if the bridge was 3 lane, you want to widen into 4 lane. And then you have to decide how many piers you need to add. And then you look at test data, say, okay, probably if design was for like 20 tons, now actually we test to 25 tons, and we have enough reserved capacities. In that case, probably may not need to add much at all. And the maintenance and repair history, this is like a mini document inside a big document. In other words, if you do a major rehabilitation, you should keep everything I just discussed into that rehabilitation project. It should have all the like specification, design drawings, material testing, and so on. And also, like all correspondence too. And the repair history is very important in another dimension, that when you do repair, you probably may actually change the load capacities, so that we will need to do a upgrade of inventory and inventory appraisal sheet. We'll discuss that later. In other words, the characters of the bridge may also be altered. Coating history is like a very strange thing. Usually it's not an important part of a bridge, but because of we have more and more environment concerns everywhere, from Europe to Asia to US, to less extent in the United States. And we find that especially a lot of coating material has a potential problem. We all know, in the past we use lead-based painting, and now if we have to do a paint removal, we know that lead-based paint can be environmentally damaging, both to the construction workers. When they strip paint, they may inhale into the lung and cause problem, and the particle may go to the ground, and the ground may eventually be washed to the lakes or the rivers and poison the fishes and other animals. So everybody knows that. That's why in the United States we have to spend a lot of money if we have to do a repainting. Sometimes because of that, it's a lot cheaper just to demolish the whole structure. Or don't strip paint, just paint over it. When you paint over it, it does not last very long because you don't have very, very good finish. But because of that, there's no choice. Depending on the bridge, like if the bridge can last for another 15 years, you don't really care if that paint can last for another 50 years. As long as it can last another 15 years, will be good enough. So that can save you cost. Accident record. Most bridge owners will keep a designated engineer, usually experienced engineer, as a coordinator for accident report. Like for example, every time when that accident happened on your bridge or under your bridge, typically the police may call, say, okay, for example, if we are the city of San Jose, the city of San Jose Transportation Department, say, oh, you have such a bridge, that accident, and then the owner will send that designated engineer. It can be a consultant. Usually they stop sub out to a consulting company, so that person will go there. So he will immediately need to determine if that bridge needs to be shut down, or in other words, close to the traffic, or it's okay, you can just open to the public and do minor repairs later. So, or sometimes they might just close the one lane. In that case, you don't have really time to do a structure analysis, that kind of thing. The police just say, tell me what to do. So and also after that's why you need to have very experienced engineer for that task. Another thing is that you need to, depending on the jurisdictions, like in the United States, typically you will have to fill a form, basically just what happened and what has been damaged, and if the bridge needs to close, and even if nothing needs to be closed, if there's any repair needs to be done, and basically just you don't need to say whose liability is. That will be to be filed by between the insurance companies or the truck drivers or the owners, but basically just give them what happened, and so that. And also the reasoning is very, like sometimes the reason accident can be very random. People just like don't drive carefully, they hit a parapet, or somebody drive underneath. And we had a situation, they have excavators. They didn't even lower down, so they just drive. The excavator just cut into the bridge when they go, and so this kind of very obvious. But sometimes, and if you see like very, very similar situation, for example, that curve, that side of curve always hit by somebody, then you may just take a look to see if there's maybe the shoulder is too narrow, or the lane was too narrow, or sometimes maybe just the orientation, because every time during 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. in the morning, the accident happened. Maybe because when people drive here, the sun is just coming here, so the orientation of the bridge caused that problem. So that may be something you cannot do anything about. And posting, I don't know here. The China and United States are very similar. The posting basically just depends. You need to not only tell what weight restriction should be, also depend on the type of vehicles. If the weight is very concentrated, like a very short, so it's very, very, you cannot have very, very high. But if it's a spread, like a train, for example, the train is so long, it does not really affect the bridge much. And how this will be calculated will be discussed later. And not all bridge can be posted. If the bridge is so weak, it has to be closed. Overload permit, like in many situations, you may have much larger, heavier load to be passing over the bridge. And when we design bridge, typically we have a model truck. Like for example, in the United States, we use Astor. In Canada, US and Canada are the places I design most bridge in. They use before they use the Ontario Bridge Design Code. Now they use a Canadian Bridge Design Code, which is very similar. But like in EU, they have EU Bridge Design Code, or like British, before they use BS, and now also they also use EU. They typically just have a model truck, which represent the variety of a commercial truck to be designed. And they typically have a limited weight, and they have a certain arrangement of the wheels, like how these loads were spaced. And of course, it does not mean, like for example, if a bridge was designed for 32 tons, typically, like if you have 50 tons, it does not mean the 50-ton load cannot pass. So the transport company will need to hire an engineering company. I did a lot for the trucking company in Alberta, in Canada. They have oil sands, so they have to send a lot of equipment from Texas all the way to northern Alberta. And so most of these bridges are like a short bridges. So if we have short bridges, the trucking company will arrange a very, very large platform, and they put so many wheels so that each wheel has a very, very small load. And because it's so long, if you have bridge only that long, and the truck is almost that long, that does not produce a lot of bending or shear forces. That's for short bridges. The designer, this truck can arrange wheels, any configuration you can arrange. And for longer bridge, for example, if the bridge is like 1 kilometer long, and your truck is that, no matter how you arrange your wheels, does not really work. But fortunately, for longer bridge typically has like 2 load passes. Like for short bridge, usually we call it slab on girder. We have a slab. We have many, many girders spaced at like about 3 feet, something like that, 2.5 feet to 2.5 meters to 3 meters. And so that when the truck comes here, the rest girders does not really do anything. That's why you need to rearrange wheels. But for big, long bridge, like typically they're either cable stayed or suspension bridge or truss bridge. They have 2 load passes. So arrange longitudinally does not do anything. What you do is arrange transversely. So if your vehicle cannot pass that bridge, normally what you do is that if a bridge, like a minimum bridge is 2-lane bridge, you can have a police escort. You have police just drive like side by side with you, so that block the lane, so that, in other words, the whole bridge has only 1 truck. That effectively reduces the loading in these 2, either cable stay or suspension or truss bridge. We'll be actually discussing that later, but just I feel like that's really sensitive subject for a lot of small jurisdictions. And flooding data usually does not change. Like for example, I imagine it does not change much here, although there are some like global warming effect, but the effect should not be more than like 0.1 meters or 0.2 meters. But in certain areas, like the place I live in Maryland is a suburban area of Washington, D.C. It was like a suburban area. Now the whole Maryland become a Mac city. So very much everywhere it was like a agricultural land or forest. They all cut and all build houses or paved with asphalt. Because the impervious area changed very significantly. So when the storm, when heavy rain comes, before, like for example, 100-year storm was here, and everything was designed here. Now 100-year storm is here. So a lot of flooding happened because of overdevelopment. So that will also create problem for scar activities. Traffic data is also very essential, but traffic data need to be updated regularly. So that's why typically traffic data will be part of bridge inventory data, not the historical record. In other words, when you design bridge, you may have assumed traffic data. Traffic data will typically divide into 2 components. One is like average daily traffic, which include all traffic, is like passenger cars, buses, trucks, and so on. And another is only for truck structures. The truck structures, truck vehicles. A truck is typically used for fatigue. I don't know, I took a look. Most bridges here are concrete bridges. Don't have a lot of steel bridges. So if in northeast, we call it New England area of the United States, most bridges were designed using steels, and the steel bridge had experienced a lot of fatigue problem. So the fatigue problem is a function of how many truck traffic you have. It's accumulation. We'll be having one section dealing with fatigue. An inspection report is actually very most essential. Like besides as-built drawings, the most important is inspection reports. Like for example, if somebody asks you to design a bridge rehabilitation, and the most important document you may request is the as-built drawings and the maybe past 2 or 3 inspection reports. So the reason you have to have inspection reports with that, and not only you will be able to tell what the problems are, and most importantly, you need to tell the progress of this problem. Like for example, if you see a crack here, you want to see what happened 2 years ago if there was crack, or if there were cracks, and what's the magnitude, and so on. And inspection, in the United States, there's 2, basically inspections were used by were used for 2 purposes. Inspection started in like 1970s. When inspection reports started, because there were a lot of safety problems. Of course, there was a couple of accidents. Once there are accidents, typically the government will commission a study, and after the study, they will have recommendations. And the recommendation was that the bridge owners cannot simply build a bridge and forget about it. You need to know what your bridge condition is, and you need to do inspection. And that's at that time, the United States government, federal government, which is called Department of Transportation. And under the Department of Transportation, there's a branch called the Federal Highway Administration. So we call it Federal Highway Administration developed a guideline which called a bridge inspection, a National Bridge Inspection Standards, which is that. And also developed a training program so that recommend that all the bridges needs to be inspected, typically every 2 years. And then started, at that time, the purpose of inspection was to get your conditions. So in other words, you need to know what your condition is for the purpose of safety. In other words, if you see a safety concerns, then you need to address it. And after many, like 20 years, people are asking, I spend so much money, I do a lot of inspections, I gather so much data. What do I do with this data? And of course, a lot of researchers are studying the data, say, no, this data is very useful information. It can be used for asset management. But the only problem is, if I, like the National Bridge Standard is that it tells, it rates each element from 0 to 9. 0 means it's already failed. 1 is like almost imminent failure. And the lower the worse. And up to 9. 9 is almost like new. 8 is very good, almost excellent. And so for each bridge, for example, if one bridge has one spore, like a spore, a concrete exposed, then they will look at the table. So if you see a concrete exposed, that's rated at either 6 or 7, depending on if the concrete has collisions or section losses. But then the people do asset management say, that beam has that bridge has one beam rated 6. How do I know how much money I need? What's real condition is? They say you need to tell me what percentage of bridge has that situation. That's where they develop another, which is the ASHTO. I don't know if anybody knows ASHTO. ASHTO is an organization of 50 states and later joined by other organizations like Canadian provincial governments and some other non-US governments too. And it's more like a research, and it's more like a research and policy organization appointed by each government, by like state government. So that's why, like for example, bridge design code was F.ASCE code. A lot of things were, so they developed they call element level inspection. Element level inspection means not only, for each element, not only I need to know the worst conditions, I need to know percentage of each element of different conditions. But like 0 to 9 is just too many conditions. They say, I don't need to 0 to 9, I only need to 1 to 4. Really good, really poor, and something in between. And then I'll be able to let computer to analyze it and tell me what to do and so on. That's what we call bridge management system. We'll be discuss that later. And on Friday, actually, I'll have a very, very short presentation for that topic as well. That's why we have 2 documents. And of course, that gives a lot of extra burden to the inspectors, so that and some people do like inspection. Of course, you do the same inspection, but you have to report twice. And the detail will be different. Before, you just look at what's the condition. You see, I have a lot of cracks. Oh, this crack is largest. Let's take a measurement. And based on measurement, you look at table, say, okay, this crack represents condition 6. And you say, this beam is condition 6. Now you have to see, okay, what percentage of concrete is cracked, and what magnitude of crack too, so that you have to give a lot more detailed condition. But I feel it's worth the effort for most agencies. Like you spend a little bit of money on the inspection, but you collect useful data to manage your infrastructure. Otherwise, simply tell you like what condition is not very useful. But on the other hand, it really depends on the budget. Like for example, in China, they don't have that situation. Like if you have no much budget deficit, that will be good enough. The reason that will be good enough is that if there's a crack, and because next year the crack will be repaired. So you really don't have a situation of need to know what percentage of this problem is. It's because every time the problem is solved, so we don't have accumulation of the problems. So that's why I call National Bridge Inspection Standard. These we have, basically most bridge inspection is still following the standard. This is a national standard, this is a mandate. In other words, because typically in the United States, when you build a bridge, the federal government gives you 80% of funding. So you only need to spend 20%. And that's why actually, like in the United States, in the Constitution, and highway infrastructure is a responsibility of state government. And federal government has no jurisdictions of tell states how to do, what to do. So in theory, like a state government don't have to follow the standard. But in reality, is that if you don't follow that standard, you don't get that 80% of funding, which is almost impossible for any local government to bear. So that's why it becomes, so there will be a different type of inspections and different sequences. We'll be discussed that very, very short, just in the following slides. Initial inspection, typically initial inspection will mean a new construction. Once a bridge is built, the inspector needs to do an initial inspection. Basically, the initial inspection will just confirm everything new. If something is wrong, the contractor will need to fix it and assume everything is good. So that most of the things you need to do is just fill we call it inventory and appraisal sheet. Basically, just a location of bridge and the size of bridge and the material. That sheet is just to fill, and that will be the part of a permanent bridge record. Sometimes the private bridge may be converted. Like for example, if if there's a forest going, the logging company, they build a bridge to go to cut trees. And then this is a private bridge. So, and later, because after the cutting the trees, they see the land, it's very good to build houses. So they develop houses and shopping centers. And then once they do that, these bridges, they say, okay, I cannot manage that bridge because that's public areas. So now the city government has to take over. And the city say, okay, because city has to build a lot of streets there, landscaping, that kind of thing. So it's become a city street now. It was before was a private law. So the bridge become a city bridge. So once the city take over, it needs to do an initial inspection. Basically, just have to fill the same appraisal sheet, inventory appraisal sheet. Routine inspection is most typical. Actually, routine inspection is mandated by the federal government, which tied to for funding. So routine inspection is typically done every 2 years. That's when sometimes we call it biannual inspections. And the government can apply for exemptions. For example, like in New Mexico, it's very, very dry, and the bridge conditions is very good. They may say, oh, we don't really need to do inspection every 2 years. Can we do every 4 years? And the federal government may say, okay, you can do every 3 years. Then they can do every 3 years, something like that. And routine inspection is very, very quick. Typically, like if we do an inspection, like we probably spend like 2 to 4 hours on each bridge. And so that's very quick. Just many visual. Like if you really see something, like if you see spalling, you may use a hammer to knock to see where. That's if it's only for national bridge inspection standard. But if your assignment also include element level inspection, which I just mentioned, ASHTO inspection, then you need to spend a lot more time because you have to calculate conditions of percentage of areas for each element. That takes a little bit more time. And if you see something suspicious, and you may recommend in-depth inspections. In-depth inspection maybe come like maybe follow-up, or maybe scheduled. Like most of the organizations have scheduled in-depth inspection every 4 or 6 years. So they may schedule for all. In-depth inspection is not mandated, so that it will be a condition-based. So typically it will follow the inspection recommendations of routine inspection. So at the end of these routine inspections, the inspection team leader, typically the professional engineer, will have to write a summary, like what's wrong with the bridge and what needs to be repaired and when needs to be repaired. And also another part of recommendations, if a follow-up in-depth inspection is required. Sometimes they also have, we've discussed that, is like a special inspection. For example, if you see a crack, like normally like steel, cracking steel, fatigue crack, and you are really worried, and you may say no, there's special inspection required. Special inspection is just for that particular purpose. In other words, the inspector may go there every 6 months or every 3 months, or just take a look at that particular problem and take record and take photos and just see if there's a problem with that. That's we call special inspections. Again, damage inspection is unscheduled, so if there's no damage, you don't need to do a damage inspection. And we discussed already. For damage inspection, really, you need to fill a report. And most importantly, you need to give recommendation of what imminent action is required. In-depth inspection can be a scheduled inspection. As I said, the agencies may select like a certain group of bridges, very old bridges, and do in-depth inspection every 2 years. In other words, they may say, because these kind of bridges are so critical and so old, we don't really need to do a routine inspection. So every 2 years, we do an in-depth inspection. In-depth inspection, the major difference between routine and in-depth is that in-depth inspection, the inspector will need to be able to touch it. So in other words, they may need to bring a cherry picker, like equipment, so that you can stand there. You will be actually, they will typically use a hammer to knock everything and do very, very detailed inspections. Or can be follow up. Like for example, when people do visual inspections, he sees a problem, but he was not very sure because he doesn't have access equipment. Then he may recommend a follow-up inspection immediately. Just people can bring equipment, access equipment to do we call hand-on inspections or in-depth inspections. Underwater inspection. Underwater inspection is a little bit different. Underwater inspection typically is done every 5 years if we don't see a problem. Of course, if we do have a problem, you may have more frequent inspections. In other words, just like any other inspections, at end of the inspection is always engineer's recommendation and summary. In a recommendation, the engineer needs to write what is recommended, whether any repair is required. If there is, when should be repaired? Like typically we have a short-term requirement, long-term requirement. Short-term normally like in 1 to 2 years, or if there's imminent danger, you may have like urgent repair requirement. But typically what kind of element should be repaired in 2 years and what should be repaired in 5 years. And just a very, very rough cost estimate of these. And then recommendation of next inspection is also part of it. If there's nothing wrong, normally you can say that bridge needs to be inspected in another 5 years. Of course, the engineer have leeways to specify another 3 years or another 2 years, and so that frequency will be anywhere as long as it's less than 5 years. Fracture critical inspection. Fracture critical bridge is a bridge system that has no redundancy. And most small bridges, like for example, like slab-on girder type of bridges, because you have multiple girders, so that if one girder yields, then the rest girder will take the load, so that the bridge will not be able to collapse. But if you have a truss bridge, for example, if one truss fails, the whole bridge will collapse. Of course, most truss does not even have redundancy of itself. Like sometimes even one truss member failed, the whole bridge collapsed. There's a lot of such bridges in the United States. Like a typical bridge is a silver bridge in West Virginia, which is a steel truss bridge, and just one hanger. It's not a hanger. We call eye-bar. It's like a pin, and members. Actually, I'll show you later. That's failed, so that because the truss has no redundancy, and the bridge itself has no redundancy. That's only 2 members. So one element failed, the whole bridge collapsed. So this we call a fracture critical bridge. So for fracture critical bridge, it's required that you have a separate inspections. First of all, each agency needs to identify if we have such bridges. And once you identify it, you need to inspect these particular. In other words, it has to be in-depth inspection, in very detailed inspections. Special inspection, as I said, special inspection is a scheduled inspection, but it's not. There's no standard. It's not like a routine inspection. You have a national standard. Special inspection is following engineer's recommendation, because after his routine inspection, sometimes even after an in-depth inspection, the engineer recommends special inspection. And the special inspection can be just to inspect a particular area, like as I said, a crack, for example, or the bridge abutment may have, he discovered that about the rotations, but he doesn't know how stable it is. Maybe just let's come back another six months or 3 months or even 3 weeks just to monitor the situation. And another time you need to recommend a special inspection, that the inspector does in-depth inspections, but he has no such tools to do it. For example, if we're afraid of there's a crack, but visually cannot really see, he needs to use like an ultrasonic or some kind of equipment to do a testing. Or he looked like he saw a post-tension bridge. There's a potential of corrosion of the post-tension, but he was not certain. Then he may recommend a special inspection. In other words, you may bring a specialty contractor with specialized equipment to do an inspection for that particular element. Yeah, these are just there's like bridge inspection reports. There's hundreds of different, each agency has different format. Typically, the format is a outcome of report. It's always digital. Usually, you will have a input data screen. So most inspectors will have like a handheld, like an iPad type of equipment. So you just aside, you just import this data in, and after that, you just click print. It will show this kind of report. This is the report by Federal Highway Administration. They also have bridges. Like Federal Highway owns like all the national park of the United States, and also army bases, and also most Indian reserves. They own that, so they also hire people to do inspection for them as well. And so this is just like typically you have a couple of photos, and then there's basically just inventory and inventory sheets. The inventory sheets, usually they don't change, only until you do a major rehabilitation. For them, if you widen the bridge, and the bridge weights will be changed, and so on. And then this will be a very executive summary. Most inspection reports summary is at last page, but they put in the first page. I think it's the same. And then typically each bridge will be broken down into elements, and so that they will have recommendations of short-term repair, long-term repairs. That's also part of our engineer. This will be part of our engineer recommendations. So, like bridge will be broken down into elements like deck, superstructures, abutment, pier, and so on. So you just write the numbers, as I said, from 0 to 9, and people may say it's difficult to gauge because different inspectors may have different interpretations of this. That's why in the United States, if you want to do bridge inspections, you need to take 2 weeks training by Federal Highway Administration. They basically just train you to look at these things and say that if you see these, that should be rated 6, and if you see that, should be rated 7. So that just gives people a comment and rating. But again, it's always difficult to be exactly. And these are basically just they only have these. That's the bridge inspections. They don't have percentages. And then you do a low rating low rating, like if the bridge does not really change the condition, the rating should be the same as before. Only if you see a major crack or major deterioration, then the low rating may be reduced. Again, low rating will be also used for posting. And this will be again for the appraisal sheet. Appraisal sheet basically just the conditions, especially really the condition changes as the low rating. Otherwise, and this is just the overall arrangement of the bridge. And these are like, because that bridge was in very good shape, so we didn't see much problem. And normally, if we see any problem, we just take photos and attach to the report. Because most time, like if I read report, I only read like a summary sheet just to see what recommendation, what needs to be repaired. And then just flip over these photos and to see what the problem is. As I said, that's another called element level inspections. Element level inspection is, and you have basically each, instead of 0 to 9, it will be used like it will be like a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is the best, 4 is the worst. And you have to have percentages. Like for example, a deck may have 45% of good condition, 45% of condition 1, 30% of condition 2, and 25% condition 3, and 0% condition 4. And when computer read this data, it will have a good sense of what actually the condition of the bridge is. And because the computer knows the quantity of the deck, and it will also know if we want to repair it, how much will be the cost for repair that deck. People may say like, and it will be really difficult, time-consuming to import these tools. That's why some jurisdictions, they develop so they converter software. Like if you have element level, then they will automatically convert that to your, like for example, if you have element level for the, I just mentioned that much percentage of this, but then we convert automatically into, like for example, 7, so that you don't need to do another. But most organizations have not done that yet, so they just do a separate. One is for the safety and fulfillment of federal requirement. Another is just for the asset management. So that another thing that because it's asset management is computerized, so normally the federal highway administration, or AASHTO actually, AASHTO has developed a standard so that it gives the coding for each of the different elements, so that when computer sees that, they will know what kind of condition that. In other words, if that bridge deck, it may have timber deck, it may have a concrete deck. If even it's concrete deck, some concrete is just exposed concrete, some may have asphalt pavement on top of it. And so also computer may learn. Actually, we'll be discussing that shortly. They have deterioration models. When the computer sees your report every 2 years, and they will learn from experience, like what kind of condition will deteriorate into what condition, how many years. And not only that, the deterioration may affect others. Like for example, if computer every time when computer sees that expansion joint leaks, like for example, expansion joint were rated very poor, it's leaking. And if you don't fix, later they always find, like after a couple of years, your bearing become very, very poor. So it learned lesson that they see, every time they see joint leakage, they will know in the future the bearing will become weak. So it also has very, very well defined what condition 1, condition 2 constitutes. So that they have very, very good description than the national standard. National standard, because they are 0 to 9, they're so wide, it's almost like a rainbow. So it's difficult. People say that color is purple or like orange. It's because it's almost like continuous transition. But these, because they only has 4, so it's very, very difficult for people to make a mistake. Another thing that is to have health index. Health index is a very good concept. For example, for any agencies, how do you gauge if your infrastructure is getting better or getting worse? So you need to know what kind of funding level is appropriate. Like for them, that's where we define the health index. Basically, the health index is an aggregate of. The health index is equal to sum of percentage of each condition state times the weight. Weight is very important because not every element is equal. Like for example, if you have a little bit deterioration on the railing, it may affect safety, but if it's good enough, does not compromise safety, it's not that important. But if you have a deck, it have deteriorations, and it all really affects rideabilities. And also, if deck leaks, your girders underneath, and that will also cause problems. So the girder should have more, the deck should have more weight than your parapet. That's why you also times weight. Like for example, how get this is a very good condition for this particular bridge, because you have a condition 1 has 100. These are quantities, and that's okay. That's a percentage, and that's the weight. So if you have the weight is 0.9. Okay, well, 90%. I think it's shifted somewhere. And condition 1. Oh yeah. That's a percentage of that 90, and that's 100 the weight. So once you will get the max. This is one way, but this is not the format I usually use. I don't usually use that. I use normalize. In other words, the weight, if you add together, should equal to 1. In other words, you may actually use a percentage of each weight. Actually, these agencies actually use the number. In other words, they say 100 is most important. 60 is less important. 20 is not important at all. They did not normalize that into that. That's why they have a lot of conversions. But if you normalize that, it's just use a normalized rate, the weight times the percentage of the deterioration, then you will get for example, just forget about these. Like if I have 10% condition 1, and 20% condition 2, and 30% condition 3, and no condition 4, and the weight is for example, is 80%, another 60%, another 0%. Then you just 80% times 15%, 20% times that. You can just use that thing, so that you will get like index. If index 1 is most like a perfect healthy, and it's less than 1. But in their case, they use 100. In other words, if it's 100, it's perfect condition. So the health index, so you can track, the computer will calculate the health based on the percentage of deterioration of each element. And the importance, weight is actually the importance of these elements. So they can calculate the health for each bridge. And if you have each bridge, you can do the same thing. Like each bridge, you can have the importance of bridges, like a bigger bridge, you may give them heavy weight. Small bridge, you may give it less weight. Then you can have that, again, calculate as an index for your overall. Or you can have index for each bridge. Like for example, last year you have like how many bridges has that index, how many bridges have that index, is that distribution. Then you can look at this year if it's improved or getting worse. That's one way. But another way is you can actually assign weight for each bridges based on their size and importance. Importance is also depending on the location. That's why I prefer one single index for the whole network. So you have a weight for the size and also weight for the cost. Some bridge repair is relatively simple. Like for example, if you have timber bridge, the deck is deteriorated, I may just replace deck with another timber. It doesn't cost much money. But there's another post-tension or big truss bridge. To repair that truss costs a lot of money, so I need to give them a weight. And also the location, if the location is very rural area, even I shut down, I have no much problem. There's only very few people use that. They can use another route, just to travel a little bit more. But if I have a major highway, if I shut down that bridge, it will be very, very difficult. So I give them more weight. So this kind of weighted system is better. And also the cost, because repair or replace different bridge have different costs. So you also consider the cost put into weight, so that once you do that, your index will give you more realistic presentation of how much funding you need. If you see the index getting worse and worse, probably your funding level is insufficient. And then you will ask computer to calculate this. If I just maintain my index this constant, in other words, if I just simply keep the condition as it is now, what will be the cost? They will calculate. And you say, okay, if I want to improve 1% every year for the next 10 years, what kind of budget I need? And it will be able to calculate. I'll talk about that later. Not only bridge management can calculate how much money you need to reach that goal, it may also give you a recommendation of what to do, which bridge needs to be repaired, and what elements of this bridge need to be repaired to achieve that goal. And now that brings us to asset management. So asset management, mathematically, I always use mathematical definition. There are hundreds of different definitions. Mathematically, asset management is to select the best way to minimize your life cycle costs to maintain your infrastructure. In other words, if you spend a lot of money now, and it may not be wise. Sometimes doing nothing is better in many situations. And the reason that if you delay the project, it does not have much consequences, then by all means. And the real problem for most governmental organizations, I always worked for private until 2 years ago. I joined the government now. Like if you say, okay, I don't need that money, and next year you will have a hard time to ask for a budget that will be so much. That's it. How can last year say you don't need money, now you need so much? And also it's difficult for government to balance the interest among different organizations, different departments to allocate the funding. So that's why in reality, you always have a fixed amount of money. And then you can just say, okay, that's how much money I need. So that's why, in theory, you can optimize the spending by like each year and to achieve the best cost, best alternative, minimize the total cost. Of course, when we talk about money, we don't just add them all together. We need to discount. In other words, if the money is spent in the future, you need to discount back. Like for example, if you have 1 million next year, that 1 million may not worth 1 million now. So you have to discount back. That's why if you can delay project, usually you can save money. But in reality, again, it's not that simple. So for bridges, of course, is just an asset like any other asset. Because like in most countries, bridge is such big asset. It requires a lot of money. Another thing that the way we manage the asset is different. Like for example, I have a neighbor who is a general, work for U.S. National Defense. He says their procurement is totally different than more like civil engineering. Like when they request funding for example, buy an airplane, they request funding for not only to purchase that airplane, they request funding for like 20 years or 15 years, whatever that asset lasts. All the maintenance costs. And also all the weaponry. They say, I don't want to buy an airplane and I don't have money to buy a bomb. So what's the use of the airplane? So all this has to be a part of their request for procurement, for purchasing. But for us, like typically, the infrastructure is highly political elements for elections. Like in the United States, every 4 years there's election. Always before the election, there's a lot of money spent, so that they just want to show people now we really care about you and we're doing something. And because of that nature, all they need to allocate money for construction. After construction, they don't care. That's why I was joking with that general. I said, yeah, that's true. When you buy an airplane, the manufacturer not only deliver your airplane, they give you a manual, say how to maintain, when you need to do the oil change, when you need to replace that, when you need to replace that. That's an associated cost. But with that design bridge, I don't give you a manual. So you don't know what to do with it. That's why it's almost like a football. People just kick to next level, and if there's a problem, I just kick it. When I don't see the problem, that's fine. That's somebody else to deal with it. And of course, there's two issues. One is when you kick the ball down the road, you spend more money in the future than otherwise. Like if you have a car and you don't want to spend money on oil change, and then you just wait until all of a sudden your transmission is damaged, then you have to spend a lot more money. It's the same for a bridge. If you don't just do like a regular maintenance, washing, or just replace expansion joints, replace bearings, then you end up have to deal with a lot bigger damages. That's one important element. Another is that safety. Even if you kick the ball down, the bridge is not like old soldiers. Like in the United States, there's a very, very good phrase. The old soldiers don't die, they just fade away. And the bridges don't die, but they don't even fade away. They will be there until they collapse. And when it collapses, it comes with lives and property damages and a lot of other consequences. In other words, you cannot just simply ignore it. At a certain point of time, you need to address that. And that's why there's because I live in US for most U.S. Canada for more than half of time now. Before it was half. I lived in China for less than half now. In China, because the politician will keep on have position until they retire. So he cannot kick the ball, because when he kicks the ball, next year still his problem. So he has to address that. And of course, election has advantage of shows like if you don't like somebody, you have ways to kick him out. There's always good things or bad things about everything, but anyway, so that's why, like as I said, bridge asset management is relatively easy. The reason is that easy that we collect a lot of data already since the 1970s or 80s, because inspection and a lot of professors and academic professionals look at these, and that's why they come up with a bridge asset management system. We call it was actually a Spanish name, Puentes, which means, I don't know, a bridge or something. Or it can be French. What do you say bridge in Spanish? What? Oh, not Puentes. Okay, Puentes. Oh, okay. Yeah. But anyway, so they use that. Use Puentes as a name of software, and originally it was managed by a couple of state governments, and at the very, very beginning, many states like New York or other states developed their own system to try to optimize the management of assets, and later they feel like it costs a lot of money to maintain. That's why they typically abandon their own system and they use Puentes as a tools. And that, because all states pour resources, and it becomes really, very good software. And I think about 5 years ago, they transferred that to ASTO, and now ASTO is managing that. So basically, the scope of a bridge management system is basically just to optimize a strategy of allocate funding. If you say mathematically, it just minimize the life cycle cost to maintain the system. But there's boundary conditions, because if you say, if I don't never spend any money, then that's minimum. But you have to maintain certain level of safety or serviceabilities in other, so that boundary condition is very important. Once you get it, if you do use Puentes, I don't know if anybody, like I don't know if Costa Rica also use Puentes. Okay, actually it's open now. Now it's become it's being managed by ASTO. So any public agency, even outside the United States, can get license to use it. The only problem is if you don't have bridge inspection program, you don't have a data. Like for example, if you use Florida's data, probably it will be very similar. Maybe you may be able to manage that if you request data from Florida for all the inspection, because it got very, very similar situation. But if you use Massachusetts data or Texas data, which may give you totally different predictions of different things. So that's why it's very, very smart system, but it needs data to learn. So that's why database is essential for the success of implementing the bridge management system. Again, bridge management systems don't have to be computerized, but if you don't use computer, it's extremely difficult. I have a friend who is a chief engineer for a small county. He has only about 38 or 39 bridges. What he does, he has a county map. He has a pin each pin represents a bridge. I say, you don't need a bridge management. You just look at that. So he said, why not? It's a free software. No, actually, he told me the real reason he wants to use that before he present a budget, the politicians always ask why. He always have, like, engineers. I found engineers always have difficulty to grab fundings if it's mixed. Because the county does not have designated funding or revenue. I mean, they don't have revenue source at all. Funding for that infrastructure. So every year he has to present and funding requests. If it's same as last year, probably it's okay. But if he sees like this year he has two bridges needs to be replaced, all the funding goes a lot, then he will have a hard time to explain to the politicians. And now he says it's very simple. Actually, he said, we don't really do any funding requests. The computer did, and computer said we need that much money. So, and that, again, the Puentes is a very, very powerful software. It does two levels of analysis. One is network level analysis. One is a bridge, like an individual bridge level analysis. But actually, to do a network level analysis, he actually has to do like a rough bridge, like local level analysis first, and then he will look at the over, like if you have like 2,000 bridges, then it will look at all the data of 2,000 bridges. Then it will give you a recommendation. Like a default recommendation that if you have a health index, like if it's a 100, like a health index, some people use like a 0 to 100, like example I just give to you. Some people use like a 0 to 1, like 90.91, 0.92, or some use actually just 1, 2, 3, 4. Just I don't want to go into too detail, but if you want to maintain the same level of health index, it will say like next year how much money you will be required. And then that's a global level. And also they will give you a priority list. It will tell you with that much money, you need to do these 5 or 50 bridges. If 2,000 bridges, you have these 50 bridges. And then it will do an individual, like local level analysis. Local level analysis is that for each bridges, it will analyze it and give you a recommendation. For this bridge, you need to replace deck. For these bridges, you need to do a repainting and replace deck. For that bridge, you only need to replace bearings and expansion joints and so on, and give you a cost estimate of each, and will add up to your budget. And that's to give you a recommendation, so you can, using that recommendation to give to represent your budget. Of course, if you look at, wow, that's too much, I don't think I can get that. I may just use, if last year's budget is 20 million, I may just request for 21 million if I'm lucky. And you just request 21, even if it's recommended 50 million, you just say, I don't follow that, I don't think I can get that. I recommend 21 million, and if it's approved, you just type into the Puentes, say, okay, I have only 21 million, what to do? The Puentes say, well, with that money, you cannot fix that 50 bridges. It recalculate based on your funding level and say, oh, well, you can do these 21 bridges and what to do of each of these 21 bridges. So it's very, very good tool to do what if or sensitivity analysis. In other words, and you can try and error of different things. For example, some people play with that, say, okay, and if I got 21 million, I can do that. What if I don't have enough money? Because based on my experience, every time the contractor bid, it's more than what Puentes tell me. So I just, even if I got 21 million, I say, if I have 19 million, what to do? Then they may say, for 19 million, you should do these. And you can do a lot of what if scenarios. Yeah, it has a lot of subroutines. Subroutine is an old term. Now we call it modulus. And the modulus, in other words, means it can do a lot of predicting our future condition is very, very powerful for the software. But predicting our future condition rely on local data. In other words, if you don't have local data, it may use national data. National data may give you very, very different. But you may try to find the similar data from similar condition as your locations. For example, if you get Florida's data, which may give you very, very similar situations of deterioration. In other words, different, like for example, especially in New England states, they use a lot of salt in the winter, so the deck deterioration is very, very severe. But on the other hand, they may use a lot of epoxy-coated rebar, or they may use a stainless rebar, for example, which is not the same condition you have. If you choose a state, use stainless steel rebar, and they don't predict a lot of deterioration of decks, and you use that, it may not be very applicable to you. So the basic situation is that you generate your own data based on your conditions, and after many, many years, typically after 6 to 8 years, the computer learns enough to become very smart. At the beginning, you can only rely on the data from other sources, like if you do want to join a Puentes family. Yeah, that's deterioration model. Again, difference, there's the reason that the climate condition is different, and the detail is different. Each state has different detail. For example, in Maryland, we use a jointless bridge. In other words, we use integral abutment, so there's no joint. So there's no much problem of joint leakages. So if you use Delaware, which is the same climate condition, but we use different details, so you cannot use their data to predict the Maryland's condition or others. So that's why using Puentes has to be heavily rely on your own data collections. Cost data is even more essential. Like for example, even in Maryland, for example, the project cost in city of Baltimore is totally different than in other cities, because the union shows the cost is totally different. And optimization, they use a mathematical model called linear programming. Linear programming is basically set up a objective functions. In this case, the objective function is the cost. So it just minimize the objective total cost. And the boundary condition, there are many boundary conditions, like safety is one issue. And we have others like user cost. Like user cost is very, very essential element of this. Like if you don't define user cost, typically you do nothing will be always saving money. But if the user cost is a big issue, then it will be different. So there's optimization. You can use the software to optimize yourself. Of course, when you do the programming, you use that. And this is just like a simulation of, they only use 1 to 4 as a health index, so that what kind of budget you will get, what percentage of bridges have different, also these like cost benefit. Like you can try to use different budget, like what will be a cost benefit for the future, like future cost. Like sometimes if you spend more money now, you may save a lot of money in the future, particularly depending on what type of repair. If you repair something which causes the deterioration of other elements, usually you spend more money now, is always good, like expansion joint and bearings, that kind of thing. But if you spend money for painting, for example, which has no consequences of others, like for example, if your bridges only last another 15 years, you may just take a look to calculate how much corrosion might go to be sustained. Like if a corrosion rate in 15 years does not cause safety problem, I let it corrode, and after 15 years, I get a new bridge. So I don't need to spend any money now. Yeah, that's health index again. Yeah, that's like if you have budget, the Puentes will give you a priority list and what to do and cost estimate too. Like really the future improvement is that there's highways. Highway has the exact same asset management system, which is called pavement management system. Pavement management system is they analyze the data to see like how many years you should repave the road. Whether every 5 years, every 10 years, every 15 years, they can optimize based on the delay of traffic and like if you have very poor condition, which also causes vehicle damages and traffic jams. So they optimize. But right now they're not linked. In other words, if some organization have one person who manages bridges, another person who manages roadways, and they just finish the roadway repavement, and next year somebody say, okay, I need to widen this bridge, and you have to like affect traffic again. So a lot of people may have problem with that, and it also costs a lot of money for maintenance of traffic. So that basically just gave you a very quick introduction about bridge inspections, bridge data, and bridge asset management, and questions. We can have like many questions. Usually people learn a lot from people asking questions and answering questions. If you don't speak English, that's fine. We have professors here who can interpret. Okay. It's not on yet.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Noel from Nicaragua. I would like to know how you can make lower inspections in bridges. How you can do that in a country like us, because we don't have enough budget to do this. So to make investment like this, that kind that you show there. So I would like to know how you can prepare, how you can evaluate a bridge, for example, in a low cost.
You do the low rating or inspection? No, actually, I didn't catch. You mean doing inspection?
For example, you the budget or the record that you have on bridge. We don't have that. For example, we have a bridge from 1951. So we don't have record of rehab or something like that of the bridge. So I would like to know how you can deal with that situations when you don't have enough information about the bridge, just only the environmental of this.
Yeah, that was the situation in the United States in the early 1970s. People build a bridge and they just forget about it and until something goes wrong. And that's why the federal government introduced a requirement which bridge needs to be inspected to basically give incentive to the bridge owners. They say, okay, if you don't do that, you don't get funding from us in the future. So because in the United States, there's different levels of government. So the federal government can say that so that local government will have to follow in order to get funding. I don't know the situation here. If you have only one level of government, then it will be extremely difficult to implement that. But if the local government needs to get funding from central government, then that will be relatively easy. So, like for example, assume you have, let's say, same situation, you have only one level of government and owns everything. And then probably, I think the best approach will be just put that into building design code. In other words, the design code will be a bridge design and maintenance code. So that if it's part of the code, then people will have to follow it. In the code, you may have like a biannual inspection requirement and qualification, what kind of qualification required to do the inspection. And then once you start the inspection, then you will have a base of conditions. And once you know the base, it will be a lot easier. Once you have data, it will be a lot easier to request funding. Like right now, actually, as I said, I'm working for a transit agency for Washington, D.C. And before I joined, they had very, very low budget for the infrastructure repairs. They spend more money on building new things. What I did was I collected inspection data. I got a presentation to the general manager. I said, look, that's our infrastructure. And if we don't do something, sooner or later we might have shut down the whole system. And there won't be any revenue generated. And once they see the data, then they'll realize things. Like if you don't have data, it will be, again, extremely difficult. So starting inspection will be the first logical step. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
Basically, I have two questions. The first one is if the...
Do you need the microphone? Yeah.
Hi again. Basically, I got two questions. The first one is if the ADTT, let's say the average daily truck traffic, applies only to steel bridges. That's the first question that I have. I don't have this very clear. And the second one is if which are the main differences between the bridge inspection guidelines, let's say the FHWA and the one expressed on the ASHTO.
Okay, the first question is that the ADTT is like annual daily truck traffic. Because we own a bridge is designed for truck traffic. And another we call ADT, annual daily annual daily traffic, which is a combination of all traffic. So all traffic is a gauge of how busy that bridge is. So in other words, how important economically that bridge is. That will be part of the equation for the Puentes to decide. Like for example, if we have two identical bridges, one has much higher traffic than others, and if we have only limited funding, logically we'll try to fix that with high traffic because it generates more economic stimulation for the economy. And how it does is that it does not tell you how it will help the economy. It tells you how, if you don't do anything, will affect the economy. In other words, the cost we call user cost. User cost will be like if there's, like for example, if there's a like three-lane highway, and that bridge has only 2 lanes, and every time there's a merge, there's an over traffic jam, and you want to widen it. So I'll give you just a simple example. That example will give you very easy because you can calculate how many man hours will be wasted due to that delay. And if you just calculate what's average like productivity per person per hour, and so that you will be able to calculate how much money you wasted every day and every year and so on. So that is a user cost. Of course, there's also pollution costs because the people don't drive, they still use gas, and also vehicle maintenance, that kind of thing. We're not talking even about accidents. Like if there's a lot of accident cost is very high. There are 2 components, of course. The damage, which can calculate easily, you can have data from insurance, but another like a human life, like how many people die, how much it costs, that will be extremely difficult. And actually, it actually has values for person's life inside. And so I think that will be the difference. That any truck traffic is, because again I said, truck traffic is used for design the bridges. So how many truck traffic travelers will give you what's remaining? Like each bridge in theory will be designed for how many trucks. Like for example, if a bridge was designed for 75 years, and every day you have certain many of trucks, every day times 365 times 75, that will be how many trucks you were designed for. And if you have more trucks than you anticipated, your fatigue, your design life may not be 75. Maybe at 55 years, you may develop a fatigue crack. So that's why that ADTT is mainly used for fatigue calculations. So that's first question. Again, what's your second question?
Okay, the second question is about the differences between the two guidelines for.
Yeah. Actually, I explained. The first guideline was developed a long time ago. That was mainly for the safety of the infrastructure, and that's why that's actually it's almost a U.S. law. Everybody has to fulfill that requirements. And that system will give you like different type of inspection, routine inspection, in-depth inspection, underwater inspection, and so on. Another ASHTO type is for Puentes. We call it element level inspection, because that if you inspect only for safety, you only give the worst conditions. It does not give you the quantity of these conditions. Like for example, if you have brand new beam, you have one crack and rated as 6. So you may only need to spend repair for that crack and nothing else. But if you have like a very, very old beam, you need to repair everywhere, and plus that crack, so the cost will be different. So that's what we call element level. In other words, you need to have a different percentage of different conditions.